I'm Jo Tovey, coming to you from Gadigal land, and this is the Full Story Newsroom Edition. Well, 2026 has been a year of political surprises, but this week's shag, marry, date gate was pretty weird even by those standards. The Prime Minister began his week with an unequivocal apology after he went on a comedy podcast and gave an off-colour response about Kylie Minogue. It triggered accusations of sexism and double standards on the left, but it also revealed a lot about the nature of political discourse and campaigning in an increasingly fractured media environment, one where the questions that trip up politicians in public might not come from journalists at all. Joining me to talk about what this bizarre episode tells us about the media and politics today is Gabrielle Jackson.
Hi, Jo. Please don't ask me to play Shag, Marry, Date.
And Patrick Keneally.
Thanks, Jo. I think it's good to see the PM embracing podcasts, but I would say the invitation is always open for him to come on Newsroom Edition of Full Story.
And from Canberra, we have political reporter and Chief of Staff Josh Butler. Hi, Josh.
Hi. Sad we don't have any Tim Tams or Scrabble game or whiskey on the desk.
Oh, yeah, whiskey.
Bring it on. All right, so Gabs, let's start with you. Can you just talk us a bit about what happened on this podcast and what your first impressions were?
So the Prime Minister invited a comedian called Nikki Osborne, who also goes by Bush Barbie, into the lodge for a friendly podcast chat. Now, Bushy, her character, is apparently very famous. Not to me, but I've since found out she's very famous among my entire family. And he was asked who would he shag, marry, date out of Kylie Minogue, Nicole Kidman and Rhonda Birchmore. And he said, I've only been married for 6 months, and, she pushed him, and he said, Kylie for all three. And there was a lot of outrage about that and accusations it was sexist. And my initial reaction was, this is actually quite funny and it's not sexist. Like, that's a game that women play. I just did not understand the kind of hysteria. Was it in poor taste for a Prime Minister to get tricked into this? Yes. Is it like something I'm going to lose sleep over? No. But then I watched the whole thing and the real scandal is his joke about the Japanese Prime Minister bringing a melon as a gift. I mean, don't
Can you just explain
joke.
that?
Yeah, so Bushy, who is growing on me actually by the minute, obviously a very smart woman, asked him if what's the worst gift he's ever received from a foreign dignitary. And he said, it wasn't bad, but it was strange at first. And she brought melons. And then there was a lot of jokes about melons and he didn't quite
sort of double innuendo.
It was just very, very awkward. Obviously, the Japanese relationship is very important to him. It was the first trip he took as Prime Minister. Sanai Takaichi should be very offended by this. I mean, a melon is a great gift, and then he tried to rescue it, but it's classless.
He also talked a bit about their sex. He was asked about his sex life with Jodie as well, which was another moment that got a bit of attention. Patrick, what did you make of it?
I think that, as Gab says, the Sanai Takaichi moment was actually far worse and didn't get the initial attention. Tactless, terrible. I do think my first reaction was similar to when he was dared, I think it was before the election, to say Delulu in Parliament.
Yeah,
and
Delulu with no Solulu.
And at that point, I said on this podcast, have some goddamn dignity. You're the Prime Minister of the Commonwealth of Australia. I think my reaction would be the same with this. I understand going on podcasts to try and make yourself more relatable, but you can do it in a way that doesn't undermine the kind of gravitas or status of the office of Prime Minister. And I do think leaders should be more conscious of that. You've also got an entire cabinet and backbench who you can send off to do these kind of things. It doesn't always have to be the Prime Minister to do them. Look, I know it's a delicate dance that they're doing in trying to be appealable and popular, and it's very easy to get caught up in a kind of running gag, and for little bits to be taken as we all know, little bits on a podcast to be snipped and taken out of context. But at the same time, he walked into a trap there and he could have got out of it. I think, we've seen I think going back to Kevin Rudd, he was asked on Roe v. McManus, which seems like ancient history now.
2007.
Yeah. I forget who would you turn gay for?
Who would you turn gay for? Who we asked
It
everybody.
also seems incredibly dated now.
Yeah. God.
And he would only answer his wife, Therese. So look, I think if you want to, if you have the will, you can avoid these questions. Politicians are great at avoiding questions. They're always avoiding questions on 7:30. Why not avoid a question like this when you don't have to answer it?
Yeah. So Josh, I mean, one question people had initially with this is, why is the Prime Minister on a podcast like this in the first place? Can you explain a bit of what do you think the strategy is here from Labor?
Well, I think, and as much as Pat said, come on the Full Story podcast, Albanese, I mean, obviously people still read the mainstream news, read, reputable news outlets like ours and others. But at the same time, I think, a challenge that all of us in, the media landscape are dealing with is that people are tuning out of mainstream news to an extent. People aren't watching the 6 p.m. news and other, sort of tentpole things like that. But people are also just generally tuning out of politics. It's hard to get, the regular kind of punter to care about, what the government did this week or what the interest rates are or, things like that. So I think this strategy is about reaching people who either are not consuming mainstream news or the sort of normal news channels in the way they might have in the past, but also actually meeting people where they are and trying to access some of these voters through influencers, social media creators, podcast hosts, whatever ilk, because that's where people are spending more time. They're spending more time on their devices, on their phones, on their laptops, and listening to Spotify and consuming things through Instagram and what have you. So it's a few different things. It's the trust thing, it's the media consumption thing, but it's also the people trust some of these influencers. They trust these creators, and if you can show as a politician that you're not just this one-dimensional robot in a suit and tie who stands up and makes big, boring speeches about the economy. If you can go on and show, I like the footy, or I love, whatever your hobby is, or I'm a bit of a fun joker, that can be authentic and endearing.
I think it's actually pretty important. We've said on this podcast before how left and right is no longer a thing. Rebecca Huntley wrote an essay for The Guardian last year about what she's finding is the way that politicians need to think about the electorate now is people who are engaged and people who are not engaged. And the only way you can reach some of these people is by going on these kinds of podcasts. And it's not a bad strategy. It wasn't a bad decision to go on it. It may have been a bad performance.
The execution, I think.
I would slightly quibble with it. I just don't know if we have enough evidence at the moment to say it significantly shifts the dial on voting intentions anyway. And I'd like to see some more research on it. I think in the US election where Trump and Harris both went on a number of podcasts over there, they did a bit of research into it, and they found that 75% of people hadn't seen either of them or listened to either of them on a podcast. And that's in an environment where it's far more important to actually get people, increase the likelihood that they'll actually turn out to vote. Here with compulsory voting, I'm not convinced, or I just don't know, and I haven't seen any evidence that it actually pushes the dial or changes people's views of it. But it may do that, as we've talked about, that kind of softer inclination to think someone's a good bloke or, a likable person. I think in a softer way. Maybe.
I think it's very much that, and I think as our elections become far more sort of presidential style, like obviously, we're not voting for Angus Taylor or Anthony Albanese or Pauline Hanson directly, but through, I think over the last couple of elections especially, it's sort of accelerated that, it's more about the personality contest of the two people. And I think, I agree with what you're saying, Pat, in that, I haven't seen any research about, do these sort of things directly change voting patterns? Do people, think, I used to hate Albo, but I saw him on the Abby Chatfield podcast and now I think he's a great bloke and I'm going to vote for my local Labor representative. I don't know how that correlation sort of works, but I think in this ecosystem where things are so fragmented and it's not as it's not as important, I think, anymore to get a good front page on The Australian or get a good write-up in the Sydney Morning Herald or get a good spot on the 6 p.m. news or get a front page on the Fin or whatever. I think, people are consuming media in all different ways, and, it's like a throw everything at the wall and see what sticks kind of thing, right?
And we saw that in the last election, didn't we, where we had Labor really, you could see this strategy in action then. They were inviting influencers to they've invited influencers to the budget. There was a really broad podcast strategy in the lead up to that election. There was a bit of flack for going on things like Abby Chatfield's podcast, but that kind of like real scattergun approach to different types of media seemed to work. And there's a real, I think, valid line of criticism that the Liberal Party's woes are partly tied to the fact that they narrowcast to their base via media like Sky News, that they're not out there broadly enough and that they're not getting their message out to where Australians are.
I think it's a real mistake. There might not be research about changing your voting intention, but there's plenty of research that most people are getting their news from social media now, and it's a real mistake, or almost becoming foolish to not be going on these podcasts, to be engaging with influencers. That may be the only way you reach a segment of the community.
I think some of them, there's dangers though for what podcasters they choose to go on there. Like, I think Tanya Plibersek received quite a lot of criticism from the coalition for going on Friendly Geordies a few times. They were criticising some of the remarks he made about a Liberal frontbencher. And I think when there's podcasters who may have controversial views or might have been in trouble in the past, there is a certain, association that people get, which may or may not be fair. Like, people went on Alan Jones. Coalition members went on Alan Jones after he'd said horrific things about Julia Gillard.
I think there's a tendency a bit to see it as like new media bad, old media good and virtuous, and the fourth estate. That's not really the case, as you say. And, Peter Costello was doing the Macarena on the midday show with Kerry Ann back in the day. Like, politicians have engaged with kind of lightweight forms of media for a very long time. It's shifting, and they often tend to be run by younger people as well, which I think is a bit part of it. We
interviewed Punters Politics, Conrad Benjamin before the last election, as well as Hannah Ferguson, two quite famous young influencers. And Conrad Benjamin actually said to us, I'm the Alan Jones of the 2020s. I'm not a journalist. I'm the talkback radio guy. And politicians have always spoken to talkback radio. Why can't they speak to us?
I do wonder how much, if at all, this will actually hurt him. And I'm not saying that it was a good contribution. And I think, as a Prime Minister, you have a different level of standard than a podcaster, comedian, radio host who's dressed up as, Steve Irwin, as Bush Barbie was. But I don't know, I do wonder if this will actually hurt him very much. I think the flip side is, with these sort of things, these sort of like interesting, controversial, funny, viral interviews, whatever, they get the play on the podcast first off, and now there's been a whole week of media attention about it, right? Like, people are talking about this in a whole week, and you're seeing a different side to Albanese that some people might be like, oh yeah, good on him, like, haha, funny joke from Albo. But
so
I do wonder how it goes.
I asked some members of my family who are not fans of Albo about it, and they all thought it was so hilarious. And why are you worrying about this? You're in the media. Don't you have better things to worry about? It was funny. She pushed him into it. It's fine. And they were like, I like him a little bit more now. Just sat there shocked. And then I was like, but what about the melons? They hadn't seen that.
It reminds me a bit actually of another Kevin Rudd moment from 2007 when he was outed as having visited a strip club with Cole Allen in New York, which was supposed to be sort of the scandal that ended the campaign. People really liked it because he was sort of a dork drag to a strip club, and they thought it was funny. You know, like, I think I'm interested, what do you guys think about the risk of sort of overplaying moments like this? Like, the Liberals were pretty condemnatory of this on Monday morning. There's been a fair bit of commentary saying it was sexist and that there's been a real double standard here, that if a male Liberal leader like Morrison or Abbott, two men who were really raked over the coals for different things they said at different times, had done this, the reaction would have been different. Do you think that criticism is fair, and do you think it has purchase?
I don't think it's fair because I don't think it's about sexism. I think it's poor politics, personally. And Albanese is not a man who has subjugated women his entire career. He's not a sexist. He leads a government that's actually the most equal ever.
I don't know. I tend to think if a coalition person, I think there's probably some truth in that. If a coalition MP or minister had have said the same thing, they would be facing criticism.
Don't you think it's something to do with their record as well?
Yeah, but also, look, the criticism of Scott Morrison was over a number of decisions and things that he had said. So, yes, he faced criticism over sexism or alleged sexism far more than Albanese has. But I think that the comments on the face of them were, probably sexist. And
two Labor women were in trouble for playing this game in a slightly more obscene manner just a couple of months ago.
But will it cause him lasting damage? I don't think so. I think this is as you say, people will have different responses to this. Some people will be outraged, but I think most people, it's just, stock and trade. It will go on. It's politics as usual. I don't think most people will even be aware of it, to be honest. But I don't think there'll be any lasting fallout from it. I
thought it was actually really interesting that the comedian Nikki Osborne had written on her own social media afterwards. I'm going to sort of paraphrase. I don't have the quote in front of me, but she was sort of saying, after the backlash had kind of started happening, she was going, I'm sort of surprised by this. He was incredibly funny. The PM's office took a big risk by letting me in and doing whatever I wanted. They didn't edit the questions. They didn't pre-vet the questions. Like, again, this is sort of paraphrasing, but that was sort of the tone of it. And she was going, well, what's the big deal here? Which I think is an interesting contribution from the person who asked the question, and like you say, as a female comedian and radio host as well.
I do think maybe they should have vetted some of the questions.
I do think, just to provide a counterpoint, I actually do think it was a bit sexist. I don't think Albanese is a raging misogynist, clearly, but I mean, if I was Kylie Minogue, which sadly I'm not, the idea of being talked about in a game like that, like, she's a real person, I think it's kind of gross. And I think he kind of got away with it because he was being asked by a woman. I think had it been a bloke podcaster, this would have been seen unequivocally as beyond the pale. I think because it came from a woman, it sort of snuck under the line for a lot of people a bit. But yeah, I think it should have been best avoided and just stick to talking about how much you love your wife, as Josh said.
I agree with that.
It's probably worth making the point that this is not a terribly niche figure. This is a person who has 500,000 followers on Instagram. She's actually a hugely popular comedian and podcaster. Isn't that right, Pat? Yeah,
look, she's been a columnist for News Corp. She has, as you say, like 500,000 followers on Instagram. But it's interesting this week talking to people about it. Some people weren't aware of her. And I think it's indicative of how atomized the social media landscape is, and podcasts in particular are, that you can be on a completely different track than your, wife or neighbor or other family member. You're all consuming different things. You're served up different podcasts. Some of them, I was looking through the top 10 rankings. Some of them I've never heard of, I've never seen come up on my feed.
We were talking about how I get a lot of Abby Chatfield and Hannah Ferguson in my feed as a woman. You get a lot of Punters Politics. Exactly, you might get Joe Rogan. Like, the way the algorithm works now, we're so siloed, aren't we?
We are. We each have, a kind of bespoke media service that we subscribe to and sign up for, and it's telling us different things. And I think that is the challenge for people like Albanese and other politicians, is that how do you cover all that base? Like, what's the marginal cost of going on every single podcast that has more than 300,000 views? I don't know how many that would be. Also, it's a bit of a black hole as well, because it's not like in the old days where circulation was audited of newspapers or TV shows had ratings that you could tell which were the ones to go on. Those things are not really revealed by Spotify or Apple. So advisors will have to figure out which are the most popular podcasts what's worth his time on going on. And I don't think those decisions would be easy to make.
No, but that's why they have to go on lots of different ones. And I think, as you said earlier, Joe, Kamala Harris really suffered. She only chose to go on podcasts where she thought the people she was trying to reach would be. And I think the conclusion that a lot of analysts have made since then is that you need to go on more than just the people you're trying to reach.
And you need to be trying to convert people. You can't just be speaking sort of to the choir.
And she said it was a mistake that I didn't go on Joe Rogan, for example.
Trump went on like 13 different podcasts. He reached very traditionally unengaged people who may be the very people who helped win him the election.
I think it's interesting too, we're seeing politicians bypassing content creators, media altogether now. Like Pauline Hanson's strategy, I think, is quite interesting in creating this Please Explain cartoon series and the film that she made. David Pocock has a podcast, something I learned in the research of this episode. I didn't know that, just speaking to that sort of atomized algorithm. We're seeing, Josh, aren't we, politicians really bypassing journalists altogether and just finding new ways to get their message out there themselves?
I think this is also why we're seeing politicians do like TikTok dances and, the talking to the camera thing. Oh, I've just left question time and you never guess what happened. Like that sort of stuff where they're just trying to get eyeballs any way they can.
I don't want to be seen as an old media gatekeeper here. Like, I think it's great that there is a diversity of voices out here that we may not have heard previously. People like Conrad Benjamins, Hannah Ferguson, people who have views that are now able to put them out. And I think it's actually a good thing in an era where media diversity is under threat, that people can make podcasts and get their views out, particularly those that are different or dissenting.
I guess the flip side of it, though, to be the old media gatekeeper for a second, is that, in the case of someone like Hanson, who's finding ways to bypass the media, she's also locking the press. She's barred The Guardian and the ABC from press conferences. Trump has exercised a kind of extraordinary level of control and has a very direct relationship with his audience. There are real threats to democracy if the role of the fourth estate, and I think it can come in many different forms. It doesn't just have to be newspapers and radio and television. It can be, content sort of creators online, but that loss of that fourth estate kind of watchdog role is genuinely alarming.
Yeah, I think it's something that we should worry about because some of these influencers don't have journalistic backgrounds and don't have the experience to ask the hard questions and to hold them to account. I actually would like to see more mainstream media working with these creators to try and help train them, to try how do you read a budget paper. I think it's in all our interests to be, working with these people in a way that's productive and good for democracy.
And now it's time for what we can't get out of our heads this week. Gabs, what was it for you?
Count Binface is who I can't get out of my head. This is a candidate who is standing in a by-election as the only competitor to Nigel Farage. Please look up this story. It's amazing. Nigel Farage has made a very cynical move. I won't go into the whole story. You can read about it on The Guardian. But Britain has this amazing tradition of these kind of novel candidates standing for elections, and Count Binface has been interviewed in The Guardian this week, and it is a very funny interview, and hopefully all the voters can rally around Count Binface and he can beat Nigel Farage.
Patrick, what was it for you this week?
I think the most astounding moment of the World Cup so far has been Trump's intervening to lift the red card over Balogun ahead of the US-Belgium match. Everybody's aware of the problems with FIFA and got to choose my words carefully here, but Infantino's role in doing this, I think just the blatantness of it that shocked people deeply. But that I think a lot of people were pleased with the outcome. The US got smashed by Belgium, and there were a lot of funny memes that came out of it. The one I particularly liked is somebody posting on X saying, Belgium may have beaten the hell out of the US in the World Cup, but when this is all over, the Belgians will have to use their longer paid vacations to take their higher standards of living back to their much safer country where they'll have to spend their much longer life expectancies thinking about it.
Don't make me feel sorry for Americans. It was a pretty extraordinary game, and I feel like there is no greater way probably to get the rest of the world to rally to a team's side than an intervention like that.
Exactly.
We were all Belgian on Wednesday.
Je suis belge.
I love there was I saw this meme going around. It was like, it was like a world map, and it was like who everyone's supporting today, and like there was like the USA had the USA flag on it, every other country had the Belgian flag on it.
Yeah,
which was
most people probably couldn't find Belgium on a map. But,
I was glad that it did. It would have been nice to see where the Belgium. I couldn't figure out exactly where it meant to be. Somewhere near France, I guess. No, the at the end of the game too, like they're all doing the the Belgian players are all doing the Trump dance, that sort of, you know, the YMCA one where he's like got his hands by his side and he's sort of like rocking his hips back and forth. That everyone knows the Trump dance. But that was sort of, that made me laugh quite a bit.
Another nice element was Balogun himself is a birthright citizen who Trump is trying to
I did feel sorry
away.
for him.
He did not want to be a part of this.
No.
Yeah. I was just going to give a shout out this week to Taylor Swift's wedding as the sort of silliest but most captivating story of the week. Why you would want to have a super private wedding, but you have it at Madison Square Gardens with billboards announcing it to everyone. The guest list, all of it was just, I found it so baffling. But the thing that caught my eye the most was I noticed in an Instagram posted by Lena Dunham this week that Zadie Smith was en route to the wedding. Like, just the, absolute wild card of a guest. I want to know, does she know Taylor Swift? Is she friends with Travis Kelce? Is he like a big White Teeth fan? Was she just tagging along with someone else's date? I don't know. It was a weird event.
I feel like as a novelist, that would be incredible material for...
Well, except I think they have to sign NDAs, but yes, will we get the thinly veiled...
Two of the greatest gifts to literature of our generation, Taylor Swift and Zadie Smith.
Controversial, Gabs. All right, we might leave it there for today. That's it. Thank you, Gabs.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Patrick.
Thanks, Joe.
And thanks, Josh.
Yeah, thanks for having me.